In this exercise, we're going to work on our buttonholes and our hooks and eyes. And I have two different hooks and eyes that I'm going to be showing you. I have a regular hook and eye, like for a dress or a slimline collar. And then I'm going to do a hook and a bar. And a hook and a bar is usually seen on like a skirt waistband or a pant waistband. So we'll be doing all three of those. So what I have here is a mock shirt front, and basically what we're going to be doing, I have two sets of notches, and we're just going to be folding over twice, and so that's why I have two sets of notches. I'm going to punch these out really quick. All right, so we're going to cut two of these. We're going to consider this like a shirt front. So the shirt front will have a very basic front placket, which is just folded over twice. I have a piece here that is just for the fusible. So it's just the fusible interfacing that we're going to be using. And again, I like to use the Pellon EK130 Easy Knit. And we're going to cut two pieces of these. So these two pieces of the fusible are going to be fused to the wrong side of the fabric in between those two notches. Not to the edge, because that won't be close enough to the body of the garment to keep it stable while the machine is creating the buttonhole. I like to put it in between these two notches on this particular type of button front. So we'll apply it here, and you'll see me do that in the camera. So these are the only two pieces that actually need to be cut out. Again, the body is going to be cut out of self, and then I have the fusible that's going to be cut out of fusible interfacing. Then I have this other piece here, and this is what is called a marker. So I call it a buttonhole marker, even though I've also got the markers for the hooks and the eyes. Now I want to talk about my markings on this. So I've done this for the beginners who are still working on their perfecting their sewing skills. So I have two punch holes or drill holes here that indicate the size of the buttonhole. Now normally in this industry you would usually only see one drill hole for the placement. Some companies will put it in the center, some companies will put it at just the beginning of the buttonhole. But what I've done for you here is so that you can actually visualize where that buttonhole is going to be. I have placed a beginning and an end drill hole, and I've done two of those. Now I don't have an industrial industrial buttonhole maker. So what I have, I'm going to show you it done on my home machine. And that's one of the reasons why I have a home machine, is so that I can do buttonholes. And it has several different types, but I'm just going to do a bar tack buttonhole. And that means there's a bar tack that goes straight across at the top and the bottom. These buttonholes are about 5/8 inch wide, and this is a 5/8 wide button. So you can see that the button will go straight into the middle, and then I will have a bar at the top and a bar at the bottom. So this is the size this one is going to make. Now your machine will make several different sizes of buttonholes, so you will need to measure your button size to actually adjust the buttonhole maker for the appropriate size buttonhole. So if you have a home machine that does several different types of buttonholes, I would suggest doing an entire marker just for a sample of all of the different types of buttonholes that it actually makes, just as a reference for yourself. So these other two drill holes are for the hook and eyes, and I'll show you those once we actually get to doing those. So there isn't a beginning or an end. It's just a single mark for the placement of where those hooks and eyes will be going. So I need to actually punch these, because once we get done with the sewing, we need to come back to the garment and we need to mark where these buttonholes and hooks and eyes are going to be placed on the garment. So once it folds over, the front of the placket will be on this side of this notch, and then we'll just lay the button marker on top, and then we'll use a marking pen or a marking chalk to just signify where those buttonholes or hooks and eyes will go. So let's set these aside, and I'm going to cut everything out. All right, so now everything is cut out. I need to identify my face side of the fabric. So I will do that really quickly. Now, as I said before, we're going to apply our fusible interfacing on the wrong side of the fabric. So I'm just going to turn these over really quickly. Wrong side of the fabric, and I'm going to apply the interfacing in between the middle notches here. So again, the textured side of the fusible is the glue side, so that needs to go down, so that needs to go toward the wrong side. And I'm putting this here in the center of those notches, and the same thing on the other piece. Now what we'll end up doing once we get it fused, we'll fold this over the interfacing, and then we'll fold it one more time, and then we'll stitch it down. And I'll do that all at the, we'll do all the pressing at the press mat, and then we'll go sew. Okay, so now we're just ready to stitch down the button placket. As a reminder, we've got the interfacing and we're just folding it over twice, and now we're just going to stitch straight down, and we're going to do this to both pieces. So under the presser foot, I'm going to start with a back tack. Keep your stitching as straight as possible, coming up to the end, get ready to back tack, and there we are. There's one, and now let's do the second. Back tack. All right, and so now we're ready to actually mark for the buttons and hooks and eyes. Okay, so now that I have the button plackets all stitched down, and this is the face side of the garment, so I just need to use my button marker, my buttonhole marker and button marker, and lay it right on top, and then I'm going to mark all of these placements. Now the top two here are for actual buttons and buttonholes. You wouldn't normally see two, a top and a bottom, but I wanted to actually just identify where those are for you. Generally, you would just see a center mark, usually for the center of where the buttonhole needs to be centered on, and then that one same point would actually be where the button actually is placed. So, but just so we understand that, the top parts, the top two are the buttonholes. I gave you two, so I'm just going to mark this. Mark these all the way down. And these last two, one is going to be a regular hook and eye for like a dress, and the other is going to be a hook and eye. It's actually going to be a hook and bar for like a pant or a skirt waistband. Now these are pretty tiny, so I'm actually just going to make them a little bit larger. And I'll do the same for this side. And you want to make sure that you line up the button marker accurately. Otherwise, your button and buttonholes will be out of alignment from each other. And we'll just give these a little bit larger presentation here so we can actually see them, and that those line up very accurately. That looks very good. Now, I want to mention that unfortunately I cannot show you how to use a industrial buttonholer. However, if you're at home, if you're a student at home, then you would have a home sewing machine where you could do buttonholes. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a home sewing machine to actually put the buttonholes in here, and then actually I will show you how to sew on the buttons. So I'm going to put the buttonholes in here off camera. I will come back with the buttonholes done, and then we will carry through with actually showing you how to sew on a button by hand. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly put some buttonholes here. I have my two buttonholes right here that I'm going to do. I have the top and the bottom, and then the top and the bottom. And I'm using a home sewing machine. So if you have a home sewing machine at home, you would follow the same process. And I have the buttonholer foot on here. Let me just unclip it here so you can see what it looks like. So it's this long white piece, and there's a back piece here to put your button in, so it makes the correct size button. So that is actually a big help. So this is about 5/8, and that's what I made these buttonholes here. So I'm going to put this back on, get this back snapped back in here, and when you put this on, we're going to snap it on, and then what you'll need to do is pull this little foot on it forward. Make sure that the presser foot is up, pull it forward. It has a spring on it, so pull it forward, and then there's a little piece up here. It has a little kind of picture of a buttonhole right there. You need to pull that down, and you need to make sure this little arm on the foot is in front of that, and then it will just sit right behind that. And that is actually what is telling the machine to go forward and backwards. So I've got my piece here, and what I need to do is that there are little marks here with a little window, and we want to make sure that the top of the buttonhole is going to be covered by our stitching, and so we want to make sure that this little mark that I have here is well inside this window and of course centered. So I'm going to get that all set up here. And also make sure it's parallel to the foot you're stitching, and then also the edge of your garment here. And then when I'm ready, I can put this foot down. Make sure everything is parallel here and parallel here on this side. So I have my buttonhole all set up. I'm not going to show you that on this screen because it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. But all I need to do now is actually step on my presser foot, and it will go ahead and make the buttonhole until it's finished. So I need to press my foot pedal and keep it down until the entire buttonhole is made. All right, so I've lifted the presser foot up, and there is my buttonhole, and I've covered both of the actual markings. So I'm going to go ahead and do the second one really quick, just so that we have two buttonholes, and this will just be a good reminder for us in our notebook of what the buttonholes will do. Now, if you're using a home machine and you have several different styles of buttonholes, I would suggest doing a whole set of each buttonhole that you have on your machine. That way you will actually have a catalog of what's available to you. And also, if you're at a fashion school or in a sewing program, make sure that you test out all their buttonhole makers that they have so that you understand and are comfortable using those. So I'm just going to get this one set up here really quickly, and then we'll go through that process just one more time. All right, and so there is the second buttonhole, and we'll go back over to the table to actually cut these open. Okay, so now that the buttonholes have been made, let's go ahead and open them. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind is that you can use a seam ripper to actually rip open these holes, or you can simply fold over like that in half and make sure that your two bars are alike, and then just kind of clip right into the buttonhole itself. But be careful when you clip that you don't clip any of these threads here on the inner part of the buttonhole. So one trick you can use is to have a straight pin and put the straight pin at the base or the bottom of the buttonhole, or the opposite side that you're going to start opening the buttonhole with. So if you're doing a seam ripper and you get carried away, if your seam ripper pushes too fast, it doesn't go past the stick pin, and that will protect you from cutting these threads down here. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to actually poke my pointy end of the seam ripper straight through the top of the buttonhole. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is, as I'm sliding the blade part of the seam ripper, which is right here, I'm going to be watching side to side to make sure that I don't cut any of those stitches. So just go slow. All right. And now that buttonhole is open. If you feel that the inside is too small, and it's okay that your buttonhole is going to be smaller than your actual button, because you need to actually squeeze the button through the hole to help hold on to the button. So I can actually just kind of pierce here at the bottom. And then I'm just going to clip open the rest of that buttonhole. Okay, so let me pull in one of the button that was, this is the button that was in the carrier. So this button now will go through that hole, and it has enough tension so that if you're wearing a garment, that the button won't actually accidentally come undone. So let's go ahead and open this other one, and the way I'm going to do this is I'm also still going to put the pin at the bottom here of this other buttonhole, but I'm just going to actually just pierce the top, just kind of get it started, and then I'm going to use my snips, and I'm just going to clip a little bit down. Make sure that your snips are really sharp. All right, and that's how quick that was. So now that our buttonholes are open, it's time to actually sew on the buttons. Okay, so now that the buttonholes have been completed, let's just set these aside for right now. So let's work on these buttons. I have two buttons here. They're the same size. They are different, but it doesn't matter because they're both the same, even though stylistically they're different. They have the same 4 holes, and those holes are spaced the same. So what we need to do is I'm actually going to center the button between each of the buttonhole marks, and that's where the buttons will be placed. So to get started, I have a needle and thread, and I've already threaded it. In this case, I'm going to be using 2 strands of thread, and they're even, and they're tied off here with a knot. So just make sure that your thread is all even and that you have 2 layers of it. And I'm actually going to condition my thread. Now, of course, if you have wax, you can wax your thread with beeswax. If you're not sure about that, go back and watch the hand sewing lessons. Okay, and this is all nice and ready to go. Nice and conditioned. It will glide really smooth through the fabric. Okay, so what we want to do is we have these 2 marks, and as I said before, I'm going to center the button there, but we need to get started. Now, I'm very particular about the way the buttons are sewn on. I don't start or end anything on the opposite side here. So understand, when you button your shirt, the buttonholes will go on top of that, and you'll see the buttons being buttoned underneath. So I don't want any knots here underneath. I just want one little notice of little thread that you see. So basically the way I'm going to get this started is I'm going to start here on the top where the button is going to go, and I'm going to start in the middle of these two marks. And so I'm just going to go pierce all the way through. I'm going all the way through the fabric, but I'm not going to pull it through this way. I'm just going to take a little bit, right? And you can kind of still see a little dimple on this side, and then I'm going to pull the thread all the way through. Okay, so the thread is all the way through here, and it's all on the top. And we just see a little dimple here on the underside. You do want to catch it here, but we don't want to see a whole lot of that thread there. So now all we have to do is basically thread the needle from the underside of the button through one of the holes. Now if you have a specialty buttons that have a top side and a bottom side, or a top and a bottom, you'll want to adjust that for where the neck is on your garment and where the hem is on your garment. So for instance, if this is the top of the button, you want to make sure it's up toward the neck. So now that I've got that through one hole, and I said we're going to do a crisscross, so because I'm working at the center, it doesn't really matter which way we go back into one of these holes. We just want it to be at a diagonal. And so I'm just kind of feeding that through. So this is what it looks like right now. So it's going diagonally across those two eyes. So I don't want the button to be totally flat and hard against the garment. So what I'm going to do before I start sewing again is I'm going to take a straight pin and I'm going to pierce through and just kind of weave the straight pin in and out. And I want the pin to come up right between where I'm sewing there and then back all the way through. That will give me enough area between the button and the shirt for some space, because when I button my shirt, there is an area of thickness here, and we don't want any kind of dimpling happening when we're doing the buttons. So I'm creating some space here, which we'll actually use. I'm creating space between the button and the garment, and we'll actually use that space when we finish up sewing the button on. So now that I've got through my other eye, I'm actually going to come here and I'm just going to go in the same place I went in before, and then I'm going to come out the other side, the same spot, and pull that through all the way through. So the needle, we're never even working on the underside, but see how tiny amount that is? That's all I'm seeing. That's all I want to see. So now that I've done that, I need to go back into the original eye, right? And then I'm going to go back into the other side of the other eye. Okay, and I'm just kind of giving that a nice little tug. Remember, we don't want that button to be too snug, but I'm just making sure that the thread is tight. So now I'm going to actually continue to do the same thing, except now it's a little bit more tricky because I have a button here. So you'll have to look under here where you went originally. And I'm going in and coming out, hoping to come out in the same spot. So look under here for that spot. I'm going to go in there, right? And then I'm going to just buckle that fabric and look here where I'm coming out. And now before I pull it through, I can look underneath and see where that needle is, and that's right where I was before. So now I can actually pull this through. Be careful that your thread doesn't knot. I did condition my thread, but sometimes it likes to separate from each other. So make sure it's snug. So the next thing I do, that's enough for this side. You could probably do a couple more stitches if you want, but I'm not worried about it right now. I can come in one of the empty holes, come out one of the empty holes, and then go into its opposite. Make sure you don't catch that fabric yet. Pull it through. And then I'm going to do the same thing, go back right into that hole where I was, that I started, come out where I was before. And before I pull it through, so I know I'm in the right space, I'm just checking underneath where I was. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to find that hole, that other hole that I came out of. Make sure you're not going into the previous one. You have 2 rows of stitching on the previous one. So make sure that you're going in to the proper hole, not the one that you just came out of. So there's that one, and then I'm going to grab this other hole, trying not to grab the shirt fabric or the garment fabric. Okay, so there's our crisscross. We're actually done crisscrossing with the buttonhole. So now I'm going to do one more stitch the same as all of the other stitches, because I want to set the strength here, going back into the original hole, coming back out the other side where my other stitching is. Just double check on the other side that you're in the same spot, and I'm going to pull it all the way through. And just make sure that your stitches are snug here, that there's no loose thread there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and I'm going to wrap it around that button. There's 3, 4, I'm doing 5 times. You can do less or you can do more. And then what I'm going to do is under here, I'm actually going to take this pin out because that's enough thickness to pull this away. And you see where this thread is? That's all our stitching. To actually end this, I'm going to pierce that stitching, the middle of it, go right through the middle of it, stab through the middle of it. And then as you're pulling very carefully through this loop, I'm going to send my needle through that loop, and I'm going to tug on it a little bit, and then I'm going to come through that from the opposite direction, stab right through the stitching, and grab it. My hands are slippery, and I'm going to do the same thing. Let me pull that a little bit more, and then I'm going to pull that loop, and I think I'll go through the loop one more time. If you go through it twice, then it will help secure that. And now I'm just going to really pull that nice and snug, and then I'll get in here and I'll clip that close to the end. And so there's your button that has been sewn on, and it has enough space between the garment and the button for your garment, your buttonhole side not to dimple. And then the nice thing about this is that on the other side, it's very, very clean. There's not even it's not even noticeable. So this is really a beautiful button sewing. So I'm just gonna go ahead and button this so you can see what the finished product is like. And see, now I know I have threads I need to clip, but now between the two, there is no dimpling at all, and there's plenty of space for the garment between that button and the garment. So now I'm going to actually sew the other button on. I'm going to do the exact same thing, except this time I'm not going to talk you through it. I'm actually just going to speed it up so you can see that I've done the second button.